Imagine waking up among tombs and feeling relieved. Because tonight you've been lucky. You could have slept on mountains of trash or on rooftops that could collapse at any moment. And all of this is happening just a few miles away from luxury hotels, exclusive resorts, and some of the most breathtaking wonders on the planet. This is the daily reality in the most populous country in the Arab world. The reality of Egypt. Get comfortable, open your eyes wide, and hit like, because today you're going to discover the reasons that have turned the land of the pyramids into one of the most extreme places in the world. Let's get started. Amid the endless dunes of one of the planet's most vast deserts, in North Africa lies Egypt, a land where one of history's most powerful civilizations was born, and where humans were able to transform a hostile environment into an empire that still defies time today. The land of pyramids and pharaohs remains one of the most fascinating places in the world, but its present has little to do with the image many hold in their minds. Today, Egypt is also a country of extreme contrasts, where luxury and poverty, life and death, coexist just a few kilometers apart. In recent decades, it has become the most populous country in the Arab world, surpassing 100 million inhabitants. A figure hard to imagine, which can only be understood when one discovers how and where that population lives. Because what is truly striking is not how many people there are, but where they are. Millions of people concentrated in a tiny space, generating constant pressure that has transformed entire cities. By the way, before we continue, we want to know something. Where are you watching us from? We'll read your comments. This constant pressure has led to situations that are hard to believe, such as a capital so overcrowded that thousands of people have decided to go live in a massive cemetery and turn niches into rooms, or entire communities that have built their lives around trash, where waste is part of daily life, and even the walls of their homes. These are shocking images that we'll soon explore, but they have a much deeper explanation. A reason that changes absolutely everything. Because none of this happens by chance. And to understand it, we must first look beyond the obvious and ask ourselves a key question. Why do millions of people choose to live this way in Egypt? The answer lies not only in its cities, nor in its economy, nor even in its recent history. It lies in something much simpler, and at the same time much more mysterious. Its geography. A detail that, though it goes unnoticed by many, changes absolutely everything. Because what is truly surprising is not just the enormous number of people, but the fact that all those people are concentrated in a small strip that occupies less than 5% of the country. Because Egypt is not small. It is a huge country, but most of that territory is uninhabitable. Almost all of Egypt is desert, the Sahara Desert. Miles and miles of arid land without water, without vegetation, without the conditions to sustain life in a stable way. A landscape that, though impressive, is completely inhospitable for settlement. And that is where the key to this whole problem lies. The Nile, a river that cuts through the country like a lifeline in the middle of nowhere. A fertile corridor that breaks through the desert and makes life possible around it. Without that river, Egypt as we know it would not exist. Now imagine this for a moment. A gigantic country where almost no one can live, except on a very narrow strip of land that follows the course of a river. That is Egypt. More than 90% of the population is concentrated in that tiny space, creating a density that is hard to imagine without putting it into context. To understand it better, let's think of a familiar reference. With the population density of areas like Cairo, New York City wouldn't have 8 million inhabitants, but more than 20 million living in the same space. The streets would be packed, buildings growing unchecked, transportation systems overwhelmed, since every square meter would be occupied because there simply wouldn't be any other option. This is what happens in most inhabited areas of Egypt. Because we're not talking about a country full of people, but rather more than 100 million people concentrated in a narrow strip of fertile land along the Nile, less than 5% of Egypt's total land area. And when that entire population is forced to share the same space, the result isn't just density, It's a constant pressure that transforms everything. It's not just that there are a lot of people, it's that they're all in the same place. Cities expand but not outward because there's nothing out there. Just desert. So they grow upward, sideways, occupying spaces that weren't originally intended for habitation. Every space is utilized. Every nook and cranny counts. That's why people look for spaces even in tombs or in the trash. Every decision in Egypt is shaped by this reality. And this isn't a recent phenomenon. It isn't a modern problem. This has been happening for thousands of years. Because from the very beginning, life in Egypt has depended on that same river. The first communities settled on its banks, took advantage of its floods, cultivated its lands, and built their world around it. The very same river that allowed one of the most powerful civilizations in history to rise is the one that today limits the space for millions of people. The river remains the same. So does the fertile land. But the population has changed. It has grown steadily for decades and continues to do so today. Every year, Egypt adds hundreds of thousands of new inhabitants. In some periods, more than 1 million additional people in just 12 months. Many more are born than die. And that, in a place where habitable land is so limited, changes everything. Because the problem is no longer just how many people live here. It's that every year there are more. More people looking for space, more families needing housing, more pressure on a territory that cannot expand. That is what creates that sense of chaos the world perceives when it looks at Egypt. It is not chaos. It is pressure accumulated over decades. It is the direct consequence of a geographical reality that has not changed in thousands of years. A huge country where almost no one can live. And when millions of people are forced to share such a small space, everything begins to change. Cities become overcrowded. Infrastructure is strained. Getting around ceases to be an everyday occurrence and becomes a daily challenge. In cities like Cairo, millions of people depend every day on trains and buses operating far beyond their capacity. Cars completely packed, doors wide open, passengers traveling with practically no room to move. During rush hour, the scene resembles a system pushed to its limits more than organized transportation, as if an entire city were trying to move at the same time, on infrastructure never designed to withstand such pressure. And it's not a one-off occurrence, it's routine. Every day, when millions of people share the same space, even something as simple as getting around changes too. Solutions cease to be ideal and become necessary. And that's where realities begin to emerge that, viewed from the outside, are difficult to understand. And when space disappears, life doesn't stop, it adapts. And that adaptation is what we're going to look at now. Spaces that were never meant to be inhabited, but are today. Because when a city grows faster than its solutions, even the most unexpected spaces can become home. And one of those places emerges where no one would imagine. There are places created to bury the past and lay the dead to rest, but which, without warning, can become a refuge for the present lives of the living. Al-Kharafa, known as the City of the Dead, lies on the outskirts of Cairo. It is an Islamic necropolis with over 1,000 years of history. One of those places where life and death blend until they cease to make sense. A space conceived for eternal rest, that today is home to nearly 1 million people. Here, death is not a memory. It is part of the everyday landscape. The streets are not lined with buildings, but with mausoleums. The doors do not lead to homes, but to family tombs, often open and repurposed as if they were homes. Many of these structures, originally intended to honor entire generations, have been adapted into makeshift dwellings. Where there was once silence, there is now life. For decades, entire families have slept inside mausoleums. They cook next to tombstones, and they organize their daily lives in spaces designed for those who are no longer here. In some cases, sarcophagi are used as tables, or as simple shelves to hold everyday objects, but not out of symbolism, but out of necessity. The demographic pressure of Cairo, a city with over 20 million inhabitants, has driven thousands of people to seek out any available space where they can survive. And in that void, The city of the dead ceased to be a forgotten place and became a solution. But what is unsettling is not just the image, it is the normality with which it all happens. Living in tombs, turning names engraved in stone into something as ordinary as a house number. While you choose where to live, here they adapt to any place where they can survive. And you, would you sleep in a tomb if you had no other choice? Leave us your answer in the comments. In Al-Kharafa, hundreds of children play among the tombs as if they were playgrounds, using the niches as makeshift goalposts. Adults chat while leaning against tombstones, as if they were mere walls, and play cards on old coffins. In Cairo's city of the dead, life finds a way, but it does so in a setting that wasn't designed for it. Unlike other slums we'll soon visit, there's no break with the past here. There's coexistence. Today's generations literally live on top of past generations, sharing space, history, and silence. But waking up among the dead isn't darkness. Many of these families have been here for decades. They have built a routine, a sense of community. For them, this place is not a cemetery, it is their home. A strange home, hard to understand from the outside, but a home nonetheless. Al-Kharafa is not just a striking image, it is the reflection of a deeper reality. That of a city growing faster than its solutions, and that of thousands of people who, faced with a lack of options, learn to live happily where others see only death. Because in this corner of Egypt, life does not conquer death. It ends up becoming part of it. But living among graves is not the only way necessity transforms space, because when a city cannot expand, it does not just reuse what already exists, it also creates new places. Places born from what others discard, and which, over time, end up becoming something completely different. There is a place in Egypt where the walls are not made of cement, but of trash, where the ground is not earth, but layers of plastic, organic waste, and debris accumulated over the years. A place where the smell doesn't just appear, it lingers. Here, nothing disappears and everything stays, it piles up, and over time, it transforms. On the outskirts of Cairo, the capital of Egypt, a city with over 20 million inhabitants, there is a place that began as a solution and ended up becoming a world of its own. Here, something very similar to what happens in the city of the dead takes place. Decades ago, small groups of waste pickers began settling in this place. They were looking for a space to store and work with the capital's waste. Over time, this system was not only tolerated, but also exploited. The city's own waste management model ended up concentrating much of Cairo's trash here, and what began as a temporary work site ended up becoming a permanent place. Many of those workers didn't just stay, they adapted. They reinvented their way of life around what others discarded. What began with a few families ended up growing out of control. Today, around 250,000 people live here. Most belong to a community known as the Zabaleen, the scavengers or garbage collectors, people who, generation after generation, have made garbage their way of life. Every day, tons of waste arrive from Cairo to Manshiyat Naser, and every day they are sorted by hand. Plastic, metal, glass, organic matter, and here nothing goes to waste. Every day the Zabaleen recover materials that others discard and turn them into something useful. A piece of wood can become a roof, a piece of plastic a wall, any scrap a new room. In a place where it seems everything has lost its value, they find a way to restore it. The numbers are hard to ignore. It is estimated that nearly 90% of the trash that ends up in Manshiyat Naser is recycled, a figure that is hard to match, even for many developed countries. To put it in context, in the United States, only about 35% is recycled. Here, almost everything finds a new use. While you throw away what you no longer use, here, everything can get a second chance. Thinking about all this, could you live surrounded by trash if that meant having work every day? If the answer is yes, leave us a yes in the comments. And if not, let us know that too. We're reading your comments, and as you can see, in this city, people don't just live surrounded by trash. They also make a living from it. Homes become workplaces. Backyards turn into sorting areas. and rooftops become makeshift warehouses for things that, though worthless to others, mean the world to them. It's an informal system, but surprisingly efficient, and yet the contradiction is unavoidable. The very place that cleans up much of a major city lives surrounded by filth. People stay because here there is something that doesn't always exist elsewhere: work, identity, pride. Manshiyat Naser isn't just a landfill, it's a world of its own. A place where the world dumps what it doesn't want, and where others find a way to move forward. Because here, where everything seems like waste, life doesn't disappear, it rebuilds itself. If all this is surprising you, leave a like now, because what's coming is even more shocking. After seeing how people live among graves, and how others have built their lives surrounded by trash, on a scale of 1 to 10, what grade would you give this country based solely on what you've seen so far? At the end of the video, we'll see if you stick to that grade. We'll read your comments. Because what we're seeing here aren't isolated cases. They aren't exceptions. They are responses. Responses to the same problem that repeats itself over and over. Lack of space, constant pressure, and the need to adapt. In Egypt, life doesn't always happen where it should. It happens where it can. But there's something that explains it all, and it dates back thousands of years. Before you find out, subscribe now to Uncensored World, to explore with us every week places that aren't usually portrayed this way. How did a country capable of building some of history's greatest wonders come to live amid these contradictions? The answer lies not in the present, but in a logic that has been repeating itself for thousands of years. A way of life that hasn't changed as much as it seems, and that continues to shape everything even today. In ancient Egypt, living near the Nile was not a choice. It was an absolute necessity, because beyond its banks there was nothing. Only desert, silence, and death. And that total dependence on a single resource meant that all life was organized around it, concentrated, aligned, and limited from the very beginning. That same river that today determines where millions of people can live was the one that allowed the birth of one of the most powerful civilizations in history, because each year its floods left a layer of fertile soil that guaranteed stable harvests in an environment where, just a few kilometers away, everything was completely inhospitable, creating a unique advantage that allowed for the accumulation of wealth, the organization of complex societies, and the construction of structures that still defy time today. While other cultures depended on unpredictable rains or suffered constant droughts, Egypt had an almost perfect natural system, and that stability not only fed its population but also allowed for something far more important: thinking long-term. Thinking long-term meant building, planning, and projecting an idea of eternity that was reflected in everything, from their temples to their rituals, because for the ancient Egyptians, life did not end with death but continued on another plane, and that belief completely transformed their way of understanding the world. They did not build merely to live, they built to endure, and that is why they developed a unique relationship with death that remains fascinating, and in many cases unsettling to this day. The pyramids of Giza are not just impressive monuments. They are the result of a society obsessed with control, order, and the idea of transcendence. Structures designed not only to impress but to last for thousands of years. Precisely aligned. Built in an environment where everything seemed impossible, and which even today raise questions that remain without clear answers. Every stone, every chamber, every passageway follows a logic that blends engineering, religion, and power. A combination possible only when a civilization rests on a foundation of absolute stability. But that stability depended on something extremely fragile. The Nile was not just a resource. It was an almost divine entity, an element that determined whether the year would be prosperous or disastrous, whether there would be food or famine, whether society would advance or regress, and that dependence fostered a mindset rooted in control and respect for forces they could not fully master. When the river completed its cycle, everything functioned, but when it failed, the consequences were immediate, and that duality profoundly shaped the way the Egyptians understood power, life, and order. In that context, figures emerged who not only governed but also embodied that balance between the human and the divine, such as Cleopatra, a woman who understood better than most the power of image, perception, and influence, crafting a persona that transcended the political to become a symbol, a narrative, something to be observed, imitated, and followed, long before any modern concept of influence or mass communication existed. But beyond the names and the structures, what is truly important is the logic behind it all. Egypt functioned because everything was concentrated, because everything depended on a single axis, because life did not disperse but accumulated in a single space that offered everything necessary for survival. And that concentration was the key to its success, but also the source of its limitation. And that limitation has not disappeared. The setting has changed, the population has multiplied, and the scale is completely different, but the foundation remains exactly the same. The river continues to dictate where people can live, fertile land remains limited, and millions of people continue to depend on that same corridor to build their lives, creating a historical continuity that is as invisible as it is decisive. The past is not dead. It remains present in every decision, in every city, in every way of adapting to the present. Because the very system that allowed for the construction of temples, pyramids, and one of the most advanced civilizations of its time, is also the one that today limits the space of millions of people, creating a contradiction that is hard to ignore. What was once an absolute advantage is now a restriction, and that restriction becomes visible in everyday life, in the way of life, in the way of moving, in the way of occupying space. Because when a society grows on a foundation that does not change, the consequences eventually emerge. And in today's Egypt, those consequences are not hard to see. They are on the streets, in the way of life, in how millions of people adapt every day to a space that is no longer enough for everyone. In cities like Cairo, home to more than 20 million people, housing prices have risen in recent years to the point where many families cannot afford a full apartment, forcing them to share extremely cramped spaces, with cases where more than 10 people live together in apartments of barely 20 or 30 square meters, taking turns sleeping and making use of every corner as if it were essential. When even that space is unavailable, the solution is not to leave, because there is no alternative outside, but to go up or create space where none existed. That is why rooftops, which in other places would be empty or recreational spaces, become makeshift homes in Egypt, with structures made of wood, sheet metal, or unfinished brick, where entire families live with barely any insulation, exposed to heat, cold, and conditions not designed for human habitation. In some cases, these rooftops are even rented out as if they were normal homes, creating an informal market where any available space has value, however precarious it may be, because necessity turns any place into an opportunity. The problem isn't just the space, it's also the cost. Although prices aren't comparable to those in European cities relative to local wages, rent can account for a large portion of monthly income, especially in urban areas, forcing many people to accept conditions that, viewed from the outside, would be unacceptable. Because when the average salary for many workers barely reaches between $150 and $200 a month, paying even a few $100s for housing ceases to be an option and becomes outright impossible. And that's where everything changes, because it's no longer about choosing where to live. It's about finding any place where you can stay. And that pressure doesn't stop at housing. It spills out onto the streets. Getting around the city is, in many cases, a chaotic yet functional experience. Traffic in Cairo is known for its intensity, with streets where cars, motorcycles, pedestrians, and even animals share the same space without clear separation, creating a dynamic that may seem disorderly, but is actually a constant adaptation to the volume of people moving about every day. Traditional markets, the souks, reflect that same energy, places where thousands of people negotiate, buy, and sell in cramped spaces, where haggling isn't an option but part of the system, and where street food is prepared and consumed at a pace that leaves no room for breaks, revealing a daily reality marked by haste, density, and the need to seize every opportunity. In this context, realities also emerge that may seem extreme from the outside, but here are part of everyday life. Families that turn a single room into a kitchen, bedroom, and living room. Unfinished buildings that are already inhabited. Neighborhoods where infrastructure has not kept pace with population growth, forcing people to constantly improvise solutions. There are also striking cases, such as the keeping of exotic animals in urban settings, something that may seem anecdotal, but reflects a different relationship with the environment and with the concept of space and control, where the unusual eventually becomes part of the norm. But beyond the striking, what matters is understanding that none of this is accidental. It is not disorder without explanation. It is adaptation to an environment that does not change, to a space that does not grow, to a reality that forces people to find solutions where others would not even look. Because when space disappears, life does not stop. It reorganizes itself, it adjusts, and it continues. And that is what defines Egypt today. A country where the past isn't just remembered, it's lived. Because despite everything you've seen, Egypt remains one of the most fascinating destinations in the world, and also one of the most budget-friendly. Eating at a local restaurant can cost between $3 and $5, getting around by private transport is surprisingly affordable, and staying in comfortable hotels often doesn't exceed $10 or $20. That said, there's one important reality you should know before traveling: the visa. For most countries, a tourist visa is required, which is usually easily obtained upon arrival or online for about $25. A simple process that opens the door to a country that, in many ways, feels like another world. And it all usually starts in the same place, in Cairo, a city that can't be fully understood in just a few days, but which serves as a starting point for discovering everything else. From here, many travelers embark on one of the country's most iconic experiences: a cruise down the Nile. Because just as it did thousands of years ago, everything still revolves around this river. Traveling it by boat is a way to understand Egypt from the inside, visiting temples, historic cities, and landscapes that have barely changed over time. Depending on the level of comfort, these cruises can cost anywhere from about $200 to over $500 for several days, including accommodation, meals, and guided tours. Along the route, you'll encounter some of the country's most iconic sites, such as the pyramids of Giza, ancient temples, and cities that still live to the rhythm of the river, offering an experience hard to match with any other destination. And for those seeking to understand the other side of Egypt, there are organized tours that allow you to explore places like Al-Kharafa or the neighborhoods where the Zabaleen work. That said, it's always advisable to do so with local guides and with respect, because these aren't tourist attractions, but living realities. Getting around the country is relatively easy if you use organized services, trains, or private transportation. What isn't recommended, especially for first-time visitors, is driving. Traffic in Egypt is very chaotic, with a driving style that is much more aggressive and less predictable than usual in other countries, always due to overpopulation and the realities you've encountered. And yet, with everything you've seen, with all the contradictions, Egypt still has something that's hard to explain. Because it's not just what it offers, it's what it makes you feel. A country where you can be gazing at one of history's greatest wonders, while just a few miles away, life continues to make its way in ways that aren't always easy to understand. And perhaps that's the key. Egypt isn't a place you visit, it's a place you discover. And once you understand it, it doesn't look the same anymore. And now that you've seen the two sides of Egypt, we want to know something. Has your rating changed on a scale of 1 to 10? Would you like to visit this country? We'll read your comments. And if you think life in Egypt is pretty extreme, wait until you see what happens in the next video. Click now.